Assalamu alaikum. Our lecture today is about the neuroanatomy of diencephalon. Diencephalon is an important part of the higher brain and occupy the caudal part of the forebrain, or what is called the prosencephalon. Prosencephalon appeared here in this embryological picture, and this is the rostral part of the brain called the prosencephalon, and the caudal part of it will be developed into diencephalon. Also, diencephalon occupying the central part or the central part of the brain, and by this central part I think it is participate in important functions in integration and transmission of many sensory and motor input and output to the higher centers. The diencephalon, further localization of it, we can see it in the ventromedial aspect of the cerebral hemisphere and continue down caudally with this part of a brainstem called the midbrain. So this is the colored area, the gray colored area, or even the blue, is the diencephalon in general. The diencephalon here is composed of 4 subdivisions. The main one, the center of the diencephalon, called the thalamus, and I think you are familiar with this term. Above it and more dorsal, we have the epithalamus. Ventral, more anterior, we have the hypothalamus, and also we have the subthalamic area, and all of these are comprising what is called the diencephalon. We should take the thalamus in more consideration because it is important and is the major gray matter of the diencephalon. It's paired structures, right and left, and egg-shaped mass, حجم تقريبا الegg, containing many nuclei, lies within the center of the diencephalon. The thalamus is bounded anteriorly by what is called the interventricular foramen of Monro between the third and lateral ventricle, while dorsally this thalamus is bounded by the transverse cerebral fissure, ventrally by the hypothalamus, which is a part of the diencephalon also, and posteriorly by the posterior commissure fibers. The thalamus, as we mentioned, major or a mass of a gray matter, was situated in the rostral part or end of the brain stem. The thalamus also it is a very important relay for different sensory and motor signals comes from the peripheral body. Here you can see the boundaries of the hypothalamus. Here more anteriorly we have the foramen of Monro, ventrally we have the hypothalamus, and caudally we have also the brainstem, the midbrain, which is the first part of the brainstem. The functions of the thalamus based on 2 important rules. It serves as important relay and integrative station for sensory signals and motor informations passing to the other parts of the cerebral cortex. Where second basic or basis of function of thalamus, it regulates the consciousness, sleep, alertness, and wakefulness عن طريق communication with the internal the reticular formation present in the brainstem. The thalamus, as an important part of the diencephalon, lies in the core of the diencephalon. So the diencephalon is in the core of the brain, in the center of the brain, and the thalamus itself is again in the core or in the center of the diencephalon. It lies deep to the cerebral cortices, where it acts as a central hub, and you know the hub like that is used in the internet or intranet surfaces. When you have a hub that gives distribution of services to different regions or different rooms, فبالتالي الثالاموس just like a hub that distribute the coming informations and the impulses to different areas of the brain. The activity of the thalamic nuclei is regulated by the input comes from the ascending pathways like the spinothalamic tract and so on. So this is the main basis for the understanding the function of the thalamus, and we will come to the function of the thalamus after some slides. Now the morphological architecture of the thalamus as a gray matter, as a major part of the diencephalon, composed of many different nuclei, مجموعة nuclei, where it lies between the third ventricle more medially and the posterior limb of the internal capsule just here more externally. So this is the picture showing the lumen of the third ventricle here. هاي هي الماس of the thalamus whether right or left, and here we have the external limb of the internal capsule, the major white matter here in the hemisphere. Now this is the thalamus with its subdivisions into many nuclei. The thalamus consists of, for example, thalamic reticular nuclei, medial group of thalamic nuclei on medial side, where also we have ventral group and the ventral aspect, where we have also lateral group, and this lateral group we can call it lateral for example here lateral group of thalamic nuclei, and here we have the ventral group. We have ventro-anterior, ventrolateral, ventro-posterolateral, and so on. And the other group of nuclei of thalamus, we have what is called the medial geniculate body, that's concerned with the auditory pathway, and the lateral geniculate body present in the more caudal part of the nucleus here, lateral geniculate body, we have the medial geniculate body, and these concerning with the visual for the lateral geniculate and with the auditory pathways respectively. The other nuclei of the thalamus, we have the anterior group and the midline group also present here. The important points here to be mentioned that the thalamus is subdivided into three main regions by what is called the Y-shape internal lamina, Y-shape internal lamina of white matter. And within this white matter we have a group of nuclei نسميها intralaminar nuclei. So the Y-shaped internal lamina subdivided the thalamus into medial part or portion, lateral portion, and anterior portion present here and occupied by what is called the anterior thalamic nuclei. Generally speaking, the thalamus as a mass of gray matter in the diencephalon has anterior pole and posterior pole, where also we have what is called medial and lateral geniculate body related to the posterior pole of the thalamus. The lateral geniculate body concerning with the visual pathway, and the medial geniculate body is concerning with the auditory pathway. All thalamic nuclei receive input from extrathalamic sources أكيد وعن طريق the following: from the cerebral cortex with reciprocal connections. مع الcerebral cortex we have connection with the thalamus, the first one. The second one also we have what is called the sensory input received by the cerebral cortex from the ascending pathway are derived from the thalamic nuclei with two exceptions, because the cerebral cortex receive all the ascending pathways after relaying in the thalamus except the olfactory pathway. This is concerning with the smell function, and the extrathalamic modulatory pathway, they are not relaying in the thalamus. Third input were interthalamic connections or adhesion between two right and left thalami. Functionally speaking, the thalamus or thalamic nuclei are divided into three main types in relay nuclei that receives the input, the ascending pathway, while association nuclei اللي هم they are concerned with the processing of informations, while third type of nuclei هم the projection nuclei, they are concerning with the transmission of the input to the output to the higher centers. التايب of neurons موجودة بالثالاموس. We have a projection in neurons and interneuron. The projection in neurons concerning with the transmission of informations or input to the higher centers, for example cerebral cortex. And the other type هم الinterneuron, where these interneurons they are concerned with the information processing within the same nucleus. فالneurons either transmit information to the extrathalamic area like the cerebral cortex نسميها projection neurons، أو النيورون تكون مسؤولة عن processing of information و integration interpretation of informations within the nucleus فنسميهم interneuron. Functionally speaking, again, we can divide the nuclei of the thalamus into two main categories, the specific and non-specific. The specific concerned with the reciprocal connection ما بين الثالاموس والcerebral cortex per se, while the non-specific thalamic nuclei have input from different parts, extra thalamic regions like reticular formations in the brainstem itself, the basal forebrain, and other parts. These are the non-specific nuclei receiving these information from these different areas, where it will process them and then passing to the higher cerebral cortex. Now, the function of thalamus, after this detailed explanation regarding the nuclei and the neurons and their types, we can say that the thalamus has let us say in these words, that each sensory input from the peripheral tissue, we have a thalamic nuclei for that specific sensory input or sensory signal, except the olfactory sensory system that it receives not by the thalamic nuclei. These thalamic nuclei receives sensory signals and send them to the associated cortical area. For example, the visual pathway passed into the thalamus, and after relay in the thalamus will furtherly proceed to the visual cortex in the higher centers in the cerebral cortex. Lateral geniculate body as a part of thalamus also it's concerning with the visual pathway as mentioned that, and receive sensory input from the retina as a first order neuron and act as a relay station and process the sensory information to the visual cortex in the cerebral cortex. The medial geniculate body also part of the posterior part of the thalamic nuclei and acts as a relay station for the auditory system to proceed the informations to the temporal lobe, to the visual or primary auditory area. The thalamus also play a role in regulating the sleep function, the wakefulness, the alertness, and the consciousness. The ventro-anterior and ventrolateral nuclei of the thalamus concerned with the voluntary movement, with the control and performance of voluntary movement, and also we have the intralaminar nuclei that lies within the white matter of the internal lamina of the thalamus, and these are concerned with what's called the control of the level of overall activity of the cerebral cortex, and they are concerned with the alertness, consciousness due to its connection with the reticular formation neurons. إذن الفانكشنال consideration of the thalamic nuclei راح نتكلم عليها من طريقة أخرى according to the type of nuclei or according to the group of nuclei. For example, if we take the anterior nucleus or nuclear group, these are concerned with the limbic system function, like the connection with the hypothalamus or with hippocampal formation or cingulate gyrus and even the prefrontal cortex. Collectively, these are parts of limbic system, and so the thalamus is concerned, the anterior nuclear group concerned with the function of the limbic system. The other group of the thalamus is the medial group, which concerned with the input from the amygdala olfactory system, hypothalamus outputs to the prefrontal cortex, and by that we can state that the medial group of thalamus concerning with the behavioral and emotional expression of the person according to the external stimuli. For example, also spinothalamic tract relay here in the medial group concerning with the pain transmission. The ventral group of thalamic nuclei, they are present in the ventral part of it, and they are anterior, ventrolateral, and ventroposterior, and they are concerning with the pain transmission and also thermal sensation. In addition to that, with the pressure and touch and vibration sense due to its communication or as a relay for the lateral spinothalamic tract and medial meniscus that relay in the thalamus as a third order neuron. Now, this picture shows the cerebral cortex laterally and medially, medial aspect of the cerebral hemisphere, as a representative for the function of thalamic nuclei. I mean, we have mapping, we have mapped the cerebral cortex according to the function concerned with the thalamic nuclei. For example, here we have the motor area, and here we have the sensory area of the cerebral cortex. So the type of a nuclei of thalamus concerning with the motor activity is called the ventrolateral nucleus, and those concerning with the sensory activity called ventroposterior nucleus. Here also we have the auditory area in the cerebral cortex, and the thalamic nuclei concerning with this function is called the medial geniculate body, while those concerning with the visual pathway called lateral geniculate body, and the same thing regarding the medial aspect of the cerebral cortex. This slide shows the blood supply and vascularization of the thalamus with different branches of arteries. They are coming from the internal carotid artery and the posterior cerebral artery, and also with comes from the posterior communicating artery. So the thalamus and the thalamic nuclei, they are well vascularized. This is this point. And second point, when we have a vascular insult, or even CVA in these branches, this will affect the tissue of the thalamus and affecting the function of the different nuclei, and this will end up with a wide range of symptoms and signs according to the area damaged by the ischemia or affected by the ischemia. And this wide range of signs and symptoms, and sometimes they are related because we have, for example, sensory, we have motor signs, and even we have autonomic or even emotional signs. These collectively can be called as thalamic syndrome or thalamic syndrome. If we apply a hot object to the hand of the person, this will evoke a different feelings from pain to pleasure. The other part of diencephalon, apart from the thalamus, we have the hypothalamus. It lies more ventral and below the thalamus, very important, and have a role in many functions. The hypothalamus is divided into the following areas: the preoptic area. The second area is called supraoptic area and suprachiasmatic area. here هاي هي الهايبوثالاموس تقريبا. هنا عندنا الثالاموس موجودة وهاي الهايبوثالاموس. pituitary gland هنا موجودة. و here we have the areas of the hypothalamus. Here we have the preoptic, and here we have supraoptic chiasmatic or suprachiasmatic region. Where here we have the tuberal region. Here we have the mammary region or area. Now, regarding the function of the hypothalamus, it depends on the following points. First, integration of the somatic, visceral, and even behavioral information comes from the internal or external environment. هذا الجزء الأول من functional consideration. والsecond point إنه it will play a role in coordination of the autonomic and endocrine outflow with the behavioral status of the organism. For example, if we have fear, this will affect the hypothalamus, and this hypothalamus will controlling or coordinating the autonomic responses or even the endocrine and hormonal secretion according to the external stimulus. So the main function of the hypothalamus, we can formulate them in the following manner: regulation of the body temperature, of blood pressure, regulation of energy metabolism, and even the regulation of the reproduction and sexual activity. Okay. The last slides about the input and the output of the hypothalamus as a relay for the informations. The hypothalamus, it receives its input information via the ascending pathway from the spinal cord, like the spinothalamic tract for pain transmission and thermal transmission. The descending also fibers from the forebrain and also from the vascular system. So these are the input of the hypothalamus, while the output from the hypothalamus will convey to the following region. For example, the ascending fibers that take the informations from the hypothalamus to the forebrain, like the thalamic nuclei, to make more interpretation. And the second output pathway is the descending fibers to the midbrain and pons of the brainstem, where a third one is the influences from the hypothalamus to the hypophyseal gland or pituitary gland that control the secretion of the hormones concerning with the sexual activity, like FSH, LH, and so on. This is the main parts of the diencephalon and the thalamus and hypothalamus, and we talk about the main anatomical facts regarding them, and I am ready for any questions you have, and I hope you have get benefit from the information mentioned in this lecture. Thank you and goodbye.